All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and good evening. My name is Amber Mays. I'm the Holocaust Educator and Human Rights Associate for the Indianapolis Jewish Community Relations Council. Thank you for joining us tonight as we have this very important discussion about the current war that is happening in Ukraine. I'm going to be serving as moderator this evening, and as such, I have the pleasure of going through a few housekeeping items. First is everyone will remain on mute for the entirety of tonight's program. Should you have a question, please use the chat feature, which is going to be at the bottom of your screen. Just type your question in there and we will do our best during the question and answer time to get to as many as we possibly can. Also, Rabbi Sasso is on sabbatical and unable to join us this evening, but we're very grateful to him for initiating this program and reaching out to Dr. Atlas. And he wishes to extend his thanks to JCRC for joining Beth-El in sponsorship. So this evening, we will be hearing from Dr. Pierre Atlas and Michael Voskoboynik. So Dr. Pierre Atlas is a senior lecturer at the O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs at IUPUI. He was a professor of political science at Marian University, and from 2003 to 2021, served as the founding director of the Richard G. Lugar Franciscan Center for Global Studies. Dr. Atlas writes a monthly opinion column for the Indianapolis Business Journal, and for the 16 years prior to that was an opinion columnist for the Indianapolis Star. He obtained his PhD in political science from Rutgers University and holds a master's and bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Arizona and the University of Toronto, respectively. He is a native of Texas, grew up in California, and is an Army veteran. And many of you in the community may know Michael Voskoboynik. Michael Voskoboynik is the technology coordinator and technology teacher at Haston Hebrew Academy of Indianapolis. He was born and raised in Malin, Ukraine, and immigrated to the United States in 1992. Michael was a math teacher prior to his immigration and continued his teaching career after his arrival to the US. In addition to math, Michael began teaching technology. He developed a passion for using technology to discover family history and assigned various projects that encouraged his students to delve into their ancestors' stories. Michael created a Holocaust-related project known as Virtual Trip to Eastern Europe, where students conduct research on their relatives' Holocaust experience and present them in a way that makes their stories come alive. Over the past several years, Michael's students have been selected to present their projects at various conferences and events around the world, thus ensuring that their ancestors' legacies, memories, and unparalleled experiences live on. So thank you both to Dr. Pierre Atlas and Michael Voskoboynik for coming and joining us tonight for this important discussion. I'm going to turn it over first to Dr. Atlas. Can you please provide us with some context to the current conflict?
Yes, I will. Thank you, Amber. Michael, good to see you again. And thanks everybody for coming. And also thank you to Beth-El and JCRC for putting this together. I think it's a very important, obviously, and timely event. I'm going to share my screen. And while I am doing that, I just want to make a couple of actually kind of personal notes that I think are kind of interesting here. First of all, so you mentioned that I'd been the director of the Richard Lugar Franciscan Center for Global Studies at Marian University before I moved over. Today would have been Dick Lugar's 90th birthday. And Senator Lugar was a very strong supporter of Ukrainian democracy. In fact, in 2004, when the Orange Revolution took place, he was actually President Bush's representative of the United States to Ukraine. At the time, he was chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And then when the Russians invaded Crimea in 2014, even though Lugar was no longer in the US Senate, he spoke out very strongly against that. And he was a personal friend and mentor. And just thinking about the fact that it was his birthday today, and he had a very strong stance on Ukraine. He also was, of course, the non-Lugar program was one of the things that took got the former Soviet republics, including the Ukraine, to give up their nuclear weapons in exchange for a guarantee from Russia to recognize the inviolability and sovereignty of Ukraine and never to attack or threaten it, which of course Russia has violated those agreements. The other real quick personal thing I want to mention is the personal connections between me and Michael Voskoboynik. So my mother, who's actually logged on watching this tonight, when she was a teacher at the International School of Indianapolis, she was Michael's daughter's teacher. And then both my kids went to the Haston Hebrew Academy of Indianapolis from pre-K through 8th grade. And Michael was the computer teacher for both of my kids and also was my daughter's volleyball coach. So there's kind of like, it's kind of like this strange reunion going on. I wish it was under better circumstances. So let me kind of go through a couple of things that I wanted to go through very quickly. As Amber mentioned, I do write for the Indianapolis Business Journal. I write a monthly column. My two most recent columns were about Ukraine. It's ibj.com if you're interested. February 11th, a couple weeks before the invasion, I wrote a column about why I believe Putin wanted to invade Ukraine and went through all the different reasons. And then into the war itself, I identified what I think were some of the things that were going on and what the invasion of Ukraine represented, which to me was actually not just Putin's attack on Ukraine, but it was actually an attack on the very idea of democracy. And I think that's one reason why this conflict, as horrible as it is for the Ukrainian people, has incredible geopolitical significance. And that's why we care about it, not just in the Jewish community, not just people who care about Ukrainians, but as Americans, as people who believe in democracy. It's a very serious, major event that needs to be addressed. Quickly, I'm going to go through a couple of things, and then I want to talk about a couple of basic terms that are being used a lot. We hear a lot about this idea of ethnic Russians in Ukraine. This was one of the ostensible excuses that Putin used for invading Ukraine in the first place. This is a very interesting map. It's based on the Ukrainian 2001 census, and it basically looks at what is in every single city, town, and village council in Ukraine. What is the majority language spoken in the home? And this basically gives you a sense of the identity of the people of Ukraine. Remember, language is a primary vehicle for transmitting culture. And the blue is Ukrainian, the red is Russian. And you can see, where the areas are where they're majority Russian speaking. And obviously Crimea down here at the bottom is the main one. And then as you get closer to the Russian border, you see a few places, but really predominantly it's Ukrainian. This is a sort of a battle map as of today, what's going on right now. And you can sort of see the blue areas are areas that were previously held by the Russians that have been reclaimed by the Ukrainians in an offensive that's really shocked a lot of people. We all sort of expected the Russians to do better than they were, and there are lots of reasons why they aren't. And I think Michael's probably going to address some of that. You can also see some of the areas that have been captured by the Russians, but just because it's captured doesn't mean that they control it entirely. It just means that they're physically there, but they're having a heck of a time maintaining it. The other thing I just wanted to point out is if you look at the neighboring countries, so Belarus, which is a former Soviet republic, just like Ukraine was, they were all Soviet socialist republics before the collapse of the Soviet Union. But Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania were all part of the Warsaw Pact and the Communist bloc, but they are all now members of NATO and the European Union. And then Moldova is a part of it was a former Soviet republic as well, and it's in neither NATO nor European Union. I think they kind of wish they were. So let me kind of go through real quick what I wanted to really talk about just for a few minutes, then I'll pass it on to Michael. So there's certain terms that are being used a lot in the media, but also by world leaders and by a lot of very serious people that I really want to sort of get into, just explaining it briefly. One is genocide and the other is war crimes. What do we mean by genocide? What does it actually mean? Does it apply here? That's something for us to talk about. First of all, genocide is a term that was coined around 1943. And it was created as a word specifically to describe what was happening, what the Nazis were doing to the Jews in Europe. It literally means race murder, genocide. After World War II, in the aftermath of the Holocaust, basically, there was this idea that never again would we allow this to happen. And in response to that, out of the ashes of the Holocaust and the creation of the United Nations, genocide was defined, criminalized in international law. And it was done so in the 1948 International Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. This is an international treaty that the United States has signed. And I want to go through that very briefly so we actually understand what do we mean by genocide in terms of international law and this United Nations Convention, because it's a term that gets bandied about a lot. And the more we use it loosely, the less value it is in terms of what's actually going on anywhere in the world. So Article 1 of the Genocide Convention defines genocide. Excuse me, it says the obligation. The contracting parties confirm that genocide, whether committed in time of peace or in time of war, is a crime under international law, which they undertake to prevent and to punish. Theoretically, every country that has signed the Genocide Convention has made a pledge to prevent genocide from happening and to punish it after it's happened. It's an obligation that, frankly, we can talk about that if you want, but it hasn't really been followed that much. But still, it is there. The United States ratified the Genocide Convention in 1987, so therefore the United States is one of the contracting parties. Article 2 defines genocide, and this is a direct quote. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, and that's how it was spelled, we'd say ethnic today, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. So with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, any of these groups, as such, killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. This is the actual official definition in international law of genocide. Now, whether or not genocide is being committed, that's something for us to talk about. That's something that down the line, potentially an international criminal court might determine. Just to put it in perspective, the United States has officially declared that the Chinese are committing genocide against the Uyghurs. And that is something so we have done that. It doesn't mean we're doing anything to stop it. We can't really stop China. But anyway, that's the concept of genocide. The next thing I want to talk about is the Geneva Conventions, international humanitarian law, and the law of armed conflict. And this is where we get the concept of war crimes. And is Russia committing war crimes in Ukraine? So the international humanitarian law comes out of the Geneva Conventions of 1949. And what I want to do right now, I'm going to back out of this one. I'm going to show you a 3-minute video. So let me stop sharing this one, and I'm going to share another screen. Whoops, hang on a second here. Give me 1 second. And this video is put together by the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, which is the official monitor and enforcer of the Geneva Conventions since the 19th century. Here we go.
When wars happen, international humanitarian law sets out agreed rules for how they are to be conducted. States develop these rules to protect the civilian population from the effects of hostilities.
First of all, can everybody hear that? Can you hear it?
Yeah.
Thank you. As you're watching this, and it goes through and again, it's only 3 minutes long, think about what you know that Russia has been doing in Ukraine and ask yourself, what they're doing consistent with international humanitarian law, or do you think they're violating it? I'll continue.
These rules outline what targets may be legally attacked and how, based on a careful balance between military necessity and humanity. Like all of IHL, they apply regardless of the reasons for fighting. The 3 main principles are distinction, proportionality, and precautions. The principle of distinction requires parties to armed conflicts to distinguish at all times between the civilian population and combatants, and between civilian objects and military objectives. Attacks against military objectives, including combatants, are not prohibited. In contrast, the civilian population, individual civilians, and civilian objects must never be attacked. Direct attacks against them are prohibited, as are indiscriminate attacks. That is, attacks that by their nature strike military objectives and civilians or civilian objects without distinction. Under the principle of proportionality, attacks against military objectives are prohibited if such attacks may be expected to cause incidental loss of civilian life, injury to civilians, damage to civilian objects, or a combination of these, which would be excessive in relation to the concrete and direct military advantage anticipated. In simple terms, this means that a military objective may only be attacked if the potential accompanying civilian losses are not expected to outweigh the foreseen military advantage. The principle of precautions requires that in the conduct of military operations, constant care must be taken to spare the civilian population, civilians, and civilian objects. In attack, so-called active precautions include doing everything feasible to verify that targets are indeed military objectives, canceling or suspending an attack if it becomes apparent that the target is not a military objective, and giving effective advance warning of attacks, which may affect the civilian population unless circumstances do not permit. So-called passive precautions require taking all feasible steps to protect the civilian population and civilian objects under one's control against the effects of attacks. The principles of distinction, proportionality, and precautions are complementary, and all three must be respected for an attack to be lawful. Distinction, proportionality, and precautions, like IHL in general, do not stop wars from happening. But these three principles work together as a tool to limit suffering and destruction. By outlining rules for the conduct of hostilities, it is possible for international humanitarian law to prevent, or at least reduce, war's most devastating effects.
Okay, let me get back to my other one real quick here. Okay, so the law of armed conflict, there are basically four principles. Distinction is very similar to what you just saw. Distinction, the idea of distinguishing between civilians and combatants and non-combatants. Proportionality, you cannot use excessive force, avoid incidental attacks. Military necessity, everything done to the enemy, even though permitted by the rules, is excusable only so far as is absolutely necessary. Everything beyond that is criminal. Unnecessary suffering, it is prohibited to employ weapons, projectiles, and materials and methods of warfare of a nature to cause superfluous injury or unnecessary suffering. The law of armed conflict, or the law of war, coming out of the Geneva Conventions, international humanitarian law, is basically taught to every American soldier. Obviously, it's sometimes not followed, but in general, people are trained. And the rules of engagement card is something that actually is written for a typical 18-year-old soldier. And this is a standard example of the rules of engagement. I'm not going to go through everything, but just to give you a couple things here. So for example, if you look at number K, hospitals, churches, shrines, schools, museums, and other historical or cultural sites will be engaged only in self-defense against fire from these locations. It says C, armed civilians will be engaged only in self-defense. Basically, it goes through all the different types of things, what a soldier is allowed or not allowed to do. And if you violate this, it is considered a war crime. I would suggest, or I would ask actually, perhaps, is this a reverse checklist of what the Russians are intentionally not doing in Ukraine? Are they not only not following the law of international law of armed conflict, are they deliberately violating it? And whether they're unintentionally doing it or deliberately doing it, those would constitute war crimes. This is Mariupol, a civilian city that has basically not much military value, in which civilian centers have been deliberately targeted by the Russians. And then, as we're seeing right now with Bucha, that has just been liberated by the Ukrainians, we're finding a lot of civilians who have been shot in the back of the head with their hands tied behind them, bodies put into mass graves, very much the deliberate attack on civilians. And unfortunately, that's where we are right now, it looks. This is basically what I had. I wanted to sort of give everybody a sense of some of these terms. What do we mean by war crimes? What do we mean by, all these other kinds of things? So let me, yeah, okay. Very good. Was I still sharing my last screen? Did you see that?
No, we weren't able to see.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. All right. I forgot to
few images.
But you explained it really well.
Okay. Well, thank you. But the last ones I just had some pictures that frankly, everybody's seen them on television anyway. I thought I shared it, but I apologize. Anyway, thank you. And I will pass it on.
Thank you, Dr. Atlas. Greatly appreciate you providing the context to what is going on I'm going to turn it over to Michael. If you could please tell us what it was like growing up in Ukraine, former Soviet Union, and your perspectives on the war.
First of all, thank you to JCRC and Beth-El for inviting me to this very important conversation. And it's probably easier if I show my slides, and I will explain a little bit about my background and how it went. So here's my slideshow, and this is the map of Ukraine. I came to United States from the city of Vinnytsia, right here, or Vinnytsia in Ukrainian. But I was born in Shtetl, in town of Malin. It's right here. It's very close. It's very close to Kiev. And what I want to tell you is that I remember from my childhood years how proud I was that I was born in the biggest country in the world. Is the largest. I was so proud. The best. I thought it was the best country in the world. Many of you, some of you know that I sing, and I remember myself singing in first grade on the stage the very famous Russian song "Россия, Родина моя." It means Russia, my homeland. Now it sounds very sarcastic. I mean, it's not a homeland. So I also remember how proud we were when I was at preschool, and our teacher from preschool left Ukraine, left our hometown, and we found out she went to Israel. And I couldn't understand how it was 1973 or something like that, and I can understand why she would leave such a beautiful country. We don't understand. We had one radio station. Yeah, you can see one radio station and 2 or 3 TV stations. And we were told that we are the best place in the world, and we believed it. Now going forward, before I go to my next slide, I want to tell you that Malin is lucky, because if you look at this map, when Russian soldiers, I'm just jumping forward because we'll come back to this. So when Russian soldiers went from Belarus, tried to get to Kiev, they went through this yellow roads. They went through this road. They went through the place and occupied the place where my maternal grandmother was from, near Chernobyl, in this area. That town doesn't exist anymore. Then that's where Ivankiv, that's my paternal grandmother was born. Ivankiv, it was occupied. And then these places, when I was in high school, I would go to Kiev to get food, because we didn't have much food, cheap food in my hometown. So I would take a train and I would go to Kiev maybe once a month or twice a month, because my father died when I was only 4, and my mother couldn't. I mean, I was trying to help my family to get food. But near Kiev, you can get much more food, cheaper food. So I would go on a train through all these places, Borodyanka, Vorzel, Bucha, Hostomel, Irpin. These are the places where the most atrocity was done, and we are finding out right now. Just yesterday, I kind of assumed that it was happening from information from Mariupol and other places, and then they show the picture. We will talk about this a little bit later. But my hometown is so a little kind of lucky, because it was about 20 miles from the places where Russian soldiers were. So the city was not occupied. However, it was bombed, and I'm going to show you in a moment. I may skip next slide, because next slide is when I was in army. I know Pierre will ask me a few questions about army, because we'll be able to draw some parallel between when I was in army and what's happening with Russian army, why Russian army is not as successful. But I would like to jump to this slide. This is when I visited with my daughter Ellen in 2000, my hometown. This is central square of my hometown, Malin. The monument of Lenin was still there. Now it's not there anymore. And that's how it looked. This is view from our hotel room. And I'm going to I'm going to click to watch closely. I'm going to click over here, and you're going to see the video. Take a look. So this video was made next day after my hometown was bombed. There's no military, nothing, infrastructure, nothing military, never been, since I remember, nothing. It only like civil people, that's all. And if you look closely over here, this is that place. Go back, you see my mouse over here, right? It's right here. So that's exactly this place where after it was bombing, and people got killed over here. And then this is the bridge, main bridge between center of the city, which is down south below, and the other big part of the city. Two parts, like we have Budapest. There are two important, and we always walked from one, maybe twice a day, to work, to do other things. People walk or drive, and it was bombed. Why? We have no clue why it was bombed. And then a few days later, totally different part of Malin was bombed also for no reason. And the whole street of houses were destroyed. And this particular house, there was a family with two kids, twins who were born the previous year in 2021. And it was all over the news. And now you can see this, what remains from them. And this is just came yesterday. I didn't want to show it. There's so many pictures came out yesterday after Russian soldier left. They were defeated. They left Kiev region, and then Ukrainian army went to all these towns. These are all towns that are close to Kiev. It's like they call dacha. So there's where people went to. They lived. It was summer house, summer homes, or just went like we go camping or some other places. And they show all these pictures. I cannot show them to you. I mean, it's very disturbing to see, but this is kind of represent. And just yesterday, my former student who just had a baby in September, and she lived in Kiev, and she was lucky enough to escape from Kiev. Now she's in Western Ukraine, and she wrote me this, and I'm gonna click here, and you're gonna see Google Translate. It should come up right now. So it say, "Good evening. I'm reading about Bucha. I'm just losing consciousness. I don't understand how this can happen in 21st century. The Holocaust, the genocide against the Ukrainian people. I don't understand why you represented there are no words, no tears, just one continuous horror and pain. How can we be hated to do that with us? Bucha is just 10 kilometers from Kiev, a small picturesque town. We went there on vacation to the fall to pick mushrooms. And this is what I'm most disturbed to hear this. And she wrote to me twice, I'm scared to live on. I can't even imagine what will be found in Mariupol if it's ever captured. And after what I've seen in Bucha, then I was told, I was reading, I receive information from Ukraine even before it goes on news. I have Telegram channel, several Telegram channels, and before it goes on, like even I'm not even saying because when it goes to like European news or American news, even Ukrainian news, they use the same images that I just saw maybe 5 minutes before. And what we saw from Bucha, this is, I mean, not only they're killing people, they're raping women, mothers, raping children in front of the kids, and then after they left, they put mines in items in different things, but most they put items in dead bodies. But they kill people and they put items. So if people come and try to put them to rest, it's dangerous. So that's what is happening. So that tells you. Okay, and then I just want, if you go next, yeah, this is what my classroom looks like right now. And my teachers at school gave me these flowers. So I just, in brief, that's what I was going to tell you. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. If you have any questions to Pierre and me, we'll be happy to answer.
I'd like to, I guess I wanted to ask Michael a couple questions. And then, is that all right?
Yes, please.
So this conflict, at least the way it's being presented by the Russians, it's a lot of it is an identity conflict. It's Putin is saying the Ukrainians are not a people. They don't exist. They don't have a right to exist whatsoever. And that the Ukrainians are really Russians. I'm wondering when you were growing up in the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union, of course, presented itself as one unified country with 15 republics. What difference did it make if someone was Russian or Ukrainian or Georgian or whatever, or Jewish? I know that was another identity category in the Soviet Union. If you could sort of talk about that just for a second, and then also I know that we were talking beforehand, and you had mentioned a little bit about how the Russian army was the Soviet army was trained. Especially the young recruits, and that you sort of felt that reflected perhaps why they're performing the way they are today. So maybe you could sort of like reflect back a little bit on, even in the army, when you were in the army with all these different people coming from all over the Soviet Union, did these different identities matter the way they do today? I mean, just share some thoughts. I'm really curious.
So first of all, when Putin speaks, or people who represents Putin, they speak it so convincingly that if you only watch channel number 1 of Russian TV or Russia channel, there's no way you wouldn't believe them. That's why 83% not only support Putin and the war, except that they don't call it war. They also very proud of being supportive, and very proud of war, very proud of Putin. So that's what's happening with those people. It's very difficult to change. That's why I'm afraid that even if war is over, then nothing will change there. But going back to me growing up, we lived in Soviet Union, as I told you, we were proud, and we actually had a very good relationship. If you put aside maybe Baltic countries, maybe some Georgia, Armenia, if you put it a little bit aside, they're a little bit more difficult relationship, but all Slavic nations, Belarus, Ukraine, we were friends, because in our hometown, I remember, there were very many, not only Russian that grew up in my hometown, but there were very many transplants. We have several big factories in my hometown, and there were so many engineers and other people who were sent from Russia. They were Russian. No, we love each other. Basically, there's not animosity at all. And speaking about my service in army, so here are a couple of things I need to. You might not know that because it's totally different in other armies. So if you start serving, first 6 months, you're like a newcomer, and you will be bullied physically and verbally abused by those who lived there who were serving more than a year. Physically, yeah. Sometimes some people didn't survive. There were stories that young soldiers just killed themselves or escaped or ran away. And the reason I'm talking about that, because it's not different right now. So that kind of relationship. So until you are 1 year after you done your service, after 1 year you have a different status. Okay, now you can be a bully after 1 year. And so I was abused as a soldier. Mainly it was verbal and physical, everything. I didn't suffer that much, but after 1 year, I promise I wasn't doing anything. Actually, I was defending others from being abused. So that's happening. Now I try to imagine if you are Russian soldier right now in Ukraine, and you had really bad relationship, and you're a young soldier, you will not support each other. You will not. If somebody got injured, got wounded, and he was abusing you, you wouldn't be helping him. It's not only happening between soldiers, it's happening between officer and another. There are cases when, in many cases, that Russian officer or Russian soldier leave wounded or dead people there and don't even care about bringing them back. This is all against all the moral things. That's number one. Number two, it's corruption and stealing. That's why Russian army is not very strong, because a lot of ammunition and arms and everything was actually it's not in good shape. They're partly successful because of not of quality, because of quantity. Because there's so many of all the stuff that they have, and so many people. That's why they're still able to hold on to in some places. Now, speaking of, and I think we're stolen. So many things. It's very common among Soviets or Russians and to get advantage of something. If you're in some kind of position and your car is not working very well, you would go and steal something from tank, take out something from the tank or from army vehicle and put it at home, and then that vehicle will be ridden off somewhere, and nobody would care. Another thing, really funny thing that maybe you've heard about that. So people are very, very much afraid of the superiors. They want to show off, and when general comes to the army place, they would paint the grass, for example, to make it look good. So that's what Russian army is compared to all the others. As far as relationship between different nations, again. First of all, I want to tell that Ukrainians I was serving in the places between Moscow and Leningrad. Okay, that place, or St. Petersburg, that area, not in Ukraine. And we had very many Ukrainian officers, officers and like higher level soldiers who were above us, and they probably were most respected Ukrainians. Because they're pretty good at serving, maybe. But we didn't have any problems with, except for maybe the Baltic, like Latvia, Estonia, everybody hated them and they hated Russian and Lithuanian. That was true. And maybe Armenian and Georgian. But otherwise, we never had problems. So as far as Jewish also, maybe I was lucky. I didn't experience any anti-Semitism. Sometimes from Lithuanian people I did. They called me Židas a couple of times, but overall, no, I didn't have that.
Good.
It could have been different in some other places.
Sure. Well, I would just say real quick, what you've described, it doesn't surprise me that actually that's the way the Soviets fought World War II. I mean, they basically just threw everybody massive numbers, and every unit had soldiers whose job was to shoot deserters. So basically, the Soviet troops would go fight the Germans, and anyone who tried to run away were being shot, and this kind of thing. But what that shows, though, to jump forward to 2022, because the Russian army is the inheritor of the Soviet army and of Soviet doctrine, whereas the Ukrainian army has actually been doing joint exercises with NATO in recent years, and Ukraine has been moving more direction in a Western democratic direction, and its army has been going in that direction as well. What you're saying is that the lack of discipline with the stealing and the corruption and the lack of respect for your fellow soldiers and for your officers and vice versa in a combat situation, things will fall apart. It's also much more likely that the law of war will be disregarded, either deliberately or just out of incompetence. And so a lot of and clearly, soldier for soldier, the Russian soldiers are not at anywhere near the level of the Ukrainian soldiers, but they have more stuff. And so that's I believe that's why, because the Russian military has been unable to defeat the Ukrainian military on the battlefield from the very beginning. Putin has instead resorted to attacking civilians and to threatening nuclear weapons.
Right, and they're attacking using the rockets or bomb. So they are winning in the air.
Yes.
So they have much more ammunition and everything.
Absolutely.
But on the battlefield, there's no chance.
Right. So I think I don't know. You answered the questions that I had for you, and I was very curious, and thank you very much for that. I think we learned a lot.
Thank you.
Amber, do you want to like sort of
Yeah, I'll start fielding some questions. So I'll just mentioning it. We've had a few people already throw some in the chat, and we're going to use those to kick our question and answer period off. If you have questions, please type them in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we possibly can. So I'm going to start with a question from Hannah. What are the enforcement provisions in place to uphold international humanitarian law? And then Aaron Spiegel kind of comes in after that and says, what are the consequences for war crimes? So I think those questions go hand in hand. You're muted, Dr.
Okay, thank you. All right. I went ahead, I just shared my screen again because this gives me an opportunity to show the things that I didn't show you before. This is just real quick. This is a rules of engagement card, a standard kind of one that's issued to American soldiers, outlining the law of armed conflict or the rules of war, what you can and cannot do. So for example, armed civilians will be engaged only in self-defense. That's number C. I read a couple of these before. K was the hospitals, churches, shrines, all this kind of stuff. And then just real quick, whoops. That was it. And then these are some scenes from Mariupol that we know of. And then these are some from Bucha that I mentioned before. So let me stop sharing. I just wanted to do that. So any country that is a signatory to the International Criminal Court that supports the International Criminal Court can actually indict people for war crimes. There can be investigations. The International Criminal Court, which enforces international humanitarian laws based in The Hague in the Netherlands. Now, we live in an international system where the sovereign state is supreme. There is no world government. There is no world police force. And so a country that is large and powerful, like China with the Uyghurs, or Russia, both of which have a veto in the Security Council, both of which have nuclear weapons, it's very difficult to say we're going to enforce it against you. However, if you have individual Russians from Putin on down to conscripts who have been indicted on war crimes or crimes against humanity or genocide, they can be arrested if they set foot into another country in which the country is a signatory. And that has happened. It happened after the former Yugoslavia cases. So you had Milosevic, the leader of Serbia, who actually was arrested and indicted and put on trial for war crimes, or was about to be put on trial. He actually died in prison before he could go to trial. You had some of the other leaders of the Serbian nationalist forces who actually are serving life in prison right now, who have been convicted for war crimes. You had and crimes against humanity. You had some people in the Rwandan genocide that are in prison right now. The thing is, again, the people have to be basically captured or taken in a place and then put on trial. But the International Criminal Court it's a real court, and they don't have the enforcement power of the power of the sword, say the way the U.S. government has with marshals or whatever to arrest somebody. But it can be done. The other thing is that if you actually are formally indicted, it is a real black mark. It makes your life very difficult if you were to leave Russia, and those kinds of things. So it can be done, but the international community is not going to basically go out and arrest Putin, for example, and Putin probably would not leave Russia anyway. But that's sort of what it is. I will say, by the way, the United States is not a signatory member of the International Criminal Court, for the reason that the United States does not want its military ever to be put on trial by an international court, because for whatever reasons, that we can get into that if you want. But basically, so it's kind of ironic because we talk about accusing a country of war crimes, but we're not actually at the table with the International Criminal Court. But the entire European Union is, most of the rest of the world is, and that's what would happen, basically.
Let me jump in. From different point of view, everything what you said, of course, is right. But when I listen to different interviews in Ukrainian TV from Russian journalists and professionals, I mean, when you talk about United Nations or gag court and everything, people just are not optimistic. And the reason is because after war is over, Russians would rather be miserable, but against the rest of the world. So you're right, Putin or anybody else, or Peskov or whoever, will never leave Russia. They wouldn't care about their yacht and whatever they have. Okay, so that's why they're not very optimistic. So we'll see. I'm really looking forward to see when the war is over and everybody who are guilty will be punished and rightly.
Yeah.
But we'll see what's going to happen.
But you're right. I mean, the thing about national pride in Russia, and again, the lack of information. I mean, it's hard to believe that in the 21st century with social media and everything else, that so many Russians actually are not getting access anymore to information outside of what they're being told, and so many Russians are refusing to believe. I mean, even today, the Russian Foreign Ministry has said that all the stuff coming out of Bucha is all fake, that all the videos are fake, that these dead bodies are actually real people, and they're posing, and they're saying, you know, and then of course most of the destruction, they said actually it was the Ukrainians bombing themselves, right? And which is laughable. But if you have the country, if the country itself is rallying around its war criminals, and the country has veto power in the United Nations Security Council, and it has the largest nuclear arsenal on the planet, it's going to be very difficult to get those people. Lower ranking soldiers, lower ranking officers, anybody who wants to go out of Russia on a vacation or whatever, if they've been formally indicted, that might happen. But the International Criminal Court and the international community has to do formal, actual investigations on the ground to collect evidence, as you would in a real court of law, because it is a real court of law. And that in itself could be very difficult, just even collecting the evidence. So symbolically, formal accusations of war crimes and crimes against humanity are very important. But ultimately, yeah, time will tell if anything really happens. But keep in mind, people who committed the genocide in Rwanda, including some of the media people from Rwanda Hate Radio, and people who are involved in ethnic cleansing in former Yugoslavia, are in prison right now, convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Yes, thank you. And that actually kind of leads in, although I think you touched on it already about how the Russian people are kept in the dark about these atrocities, but perhaps you could elaborate a little bit more on the propaganda machine.
I can do that.
Yeah.
So right now, of course, they closed all the independent channels. Okay, but for 20 years until now, there were a couple of independent channels: Rain, TV Rain, Dozhd, and Echo Moskvy, and there were a couple. And guess what? Most people didn't care about watching those channels. There were, and even some people are here in Indianapolis, also would rather watch those fun channels, cool channels, like that what they like. So people in Russia, they watched Channel 1, and when you listen to them, to those propagandists, you know, it's impossible not to believe. They're so argumentative. They will show you proof. For example, let me give you an example. At the very beginning, when they bombed, remember the situation when the bomb fell in Babi Yar? I'm sure you do remember, because it was okay. So Babi Yar, it was fell at Babi Yar because it was next to the TV center in Kiev. So one bomb exactly hit the TV center, and the other one missed and ended in Babi Yar. So the Russian propaganda, the Russian TV, all those people, they said, this is all Ukrainian propaganda about Babi Yar. Nothing really happened. We invited independent person from Yad Vashem who went there and proved there was nothing happened in Babi Yar, and they would show the images. That's what they do. And I went a few weeks ago. I went ahead just I went to watch. You know, went for a little bit, went to watch this Russian channel just to see. And if you don't watch anything else, you would believe it. That's what they do, and for many, many years. So I'm not surprised it's happening. You know, it's very hard to convince otherwise.
Yes. Well, and I think Russia, any sort of authoritarian government utilizes propaganda for often decades. So there's already this sort of, you're growing up and you're being taught to believe anything that the government government tells you. So it must be incredibly difficult to think outside of what you are hearing.
Same happening when I was growing up, of course. That's why we were so proud.
Yeah.
And until I went to high school, and we had the like old radio with record player. Record player was broken, but I was in ninth grade. I went and I fixed it. I fixed something, and I was able to listen to Voice of America and Voice of Israel and some other voices, Deutsche Welle, and I started finding out what the truth is. And so my mother, of course, wasn't happy with me that I was doing it, not because she disagreed, because she was scared that something may happen with me. But that's where I started learning the truth, you know. But if you only listen to what you want to listen, that's what's going to happen.
Can I add something to that?
Go ahead.
Another thing that happened, in addition to everything that Michael just said, in the beginning of the conflict, leading up to it, and then in the first week or so of the invasion, you had a lot of protests in Russia, and very, very brave people. And it looked like there was going to be a groundswell of popular, young people, young Russians standing up against the war. And then the Russians cracked down, the government cracked down really hard. And the Duma, which is the rubber stamp legislature, passed these laws that made it illegal to say anything that goes against the official state version of what's going on. And as you all know, you can't even use the word war or invasion.
Special operation.
That's why all the Western media left, because the reporters could be sentenced to 15 years in prison for even saying that there's a war going on. And then the Russian police have been very effective, even jumping on one person standing in a public space about to look like they're going to say something against the war, and all these cops will jump on them. So the potential for dissent that was there was shut down so fast. And then you combine that with everything that Michael just said about the official sources of news. There's no outlet. I think a lot of us were sort of hoping that despite the official news media in in Russia, you would have people with their social media and everything else and access to other sources, they'd be out there in the streets. And that really got shut down very, very quickly. And that's unfortunate for any potential peaceful movement in Russia, I think.
Yeah, the largest group of, as I said, totally believe what Putin says. The smaller group is afraid to say anything, and those who are lucky, they just left.
Yeah.
The bravest one, they just left, and I know quite a few people, well-known people from from well-known people like singers or musicians or journalists. They just left. They're in different places. In Israel, in Georgia, some other places. So that's what's happening in Russia.
So we have another question here from Charlie Wiles. Why hasn't this become more of a regional conflict?
I would say it hasn't become a regional conflict because Russia hasn't made it a regional conflict. I mean, frankly, they're staying within Ukraine. I mean, I think there had been a concern, and part of it is the Russians are staying in Ukraine. They are not threatening any NATO countries. I think part of that actually has to do with the overwhelmingly unified response of NATO and the European Union. I think the Russians and Putin were really surprised by several factors. One, how badly their military would perform, how strongly the Ukrainians would fight, how the Ukrainian people, even native Russian speakers, would see themselves as Ukrainians first and would reject all of the propaganda that they were being liberated. But on top of that, Putin did not believe and did not see coming how unified Europe and the United States would become. For 20 years, Putin has been trying to divide the United States from NATO, divide NATO against itself, divide the European Union against itself. And that didn't happen. Instead, there's been a very robust response to the point where it is very clear that Putin dare not cross the line and move into any NATO country, including the Baltics, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, which are the ones that might have been greatest threatened. I think that's what. So in a sense, the lack of Russia's the poor performance of the military, combined with the very, very strong NATO, European Union, United States response, has kept the conflict within Ukraine, and that's why it hasn't spread up as of this point. If it gets to the point where Putin looks like he might lose, and he actually does maybe use a tactical nuclear weapon or something in Ukraine or something else, it might spread. If he, but I mean, where else is he going to go? He doesn't have the ability to do it. I mean, at one point it looked like he might try and go in Moldova, but he hasn't even got the force for that. So I think it's the incompetence of the Russian military, the very strong response of NATO and the United States that has sort of contained it within Ukraine, which is not good for the Ukrainian people, but it's kept it from spilling over. I think that, and at least up to this point, that's how I'd answer Charlie's question.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit. So when I listen to experts, they say as soon as Putin attacks any of the NATO country, he will be wiped off the earth, the whole army, because it's very easy, NATO will quickly destroy them. But what is the reason, what is probably main reason why Putin invaded Ukraine? And when I even speak to my students about that, and it's very simple. Ukraine is a democracy, and Putin doesn't want Ukraine to be successful, because it's a good example what can happen in other country, in Belarus or in Russia. That's why it's not good for Putin for other people, like his environment, his circle, that Ukraine is successful. That's why they want Ukraine to be like Belarus, which is satellite of Russia. That's probably the main reason why it finally happened. So if expert says that if it didn't happen this year, it would have happened later, because that's what his plans. Empire. They wanted to make Russian Empire back, how it was many years ago.
I fully agree. And in fact, that was one of the points I made in my more recent column. The idea of Ukraine as a more Western-oriented, Slavic, former Soviet republic, becoming democratic, potentially joining the European Union, aspiring to NATO membership, which was not going to happen, but the European Union could definitely happen. It is a counter model for everything Putin is against. And Michael's absolutely right. I mean, if Ukraine succeeds as a democracy, it then becomes a model or an alternative reality for Russians, for Belarus, and that cannot be countenanced from Putin. And this was not about NATO expansion. It was about Ukraine becoming democratic. Some people who are sort of apologists for Putin say, "Oh, it's NATO's fault because of NATO expansion." I don't believe Ukraine was ever going to be admitted into NATO because of that, because I was just getting too close to Russia. But I agree with what Michael just said. It's really Putin did this because Ukraine was a threat to Russia, because Ukraine was offering the Russians an alternative to Putin's authoritarianism.
Another question we have in the chat is, did the Soviet Union agree to the Geneva Conventions?
Yes. And although I believe I just read somewhere, or I heard somewhere just today, that Russia actually recently withdrew from one of the Geneva Conventions, I think the third convention, which is the one that actually addresses civilians. I don't know if that's true or not. I think I heard it said on one of the channels I was watching. I need to look into that. But yes, they were signatory to the Geneva Conventions. They were signatory to the Genocide Convention. I mean, but everything that Putin is doing in Ukraine, he already did in Syria. He already did in Chechnya in 1999 and 2000. When the Chechens rose up, he bombed the smithereens out of Grozny and killed 250,000 civilians in 1999 and 2000. And then the bombing of hospitals and schools, they did that in Aleppo, and he was able to get away with it. Now it's being more difficult because it's in the heart of Europe, and it is threatening the international system.
And that's right. Right now a lot of people say, "Oh, he became more evil than he used to be," but he was like that even when he started. Yes. And there were some situation in Moscow. There was some explosion, and now it's proven that they blamed Chechens. It was about 20 years ago or 18 years ago. For Russians, for former Soviet people, it's a famous event. And now it's proven that he organized it. He did it to become more powerful, that he will be more loved by Russian people. Almost everything that was done like that.
So another question was, how long can Ukraine keep fighting?
I mean, they're winning. So now every day, like for the last couple of days, the Kyiv region is liberated, and Zhytomyr region, where I'm from, is liberated. Vinnytsia was never touched. There were no food. It's only east and south. But from another standpoint, they say, military experts said that because Russian army wasn't successful near Kyiv, because there, at the very beginning, the first goal, I was almost crying the first couple of days when it happened, because if you listen to CNN or Fox News, American outlets or BBC, they say that right now the goal of Putin is to kill Zelensky. Zelensky is supposed to be target number one, and then his family is target number two. So I was watching. I didn't sleep. I was watching and making sure, trying to hope that it's not going to happen. It didn't happen. So now they say that they just, because they're not successful in center, they're trying to achieve victory in Donbass, in Crimea, or in Mariupol. So that's what's happening. And we don't know what's going to happen. Maybe they will be defeated pretty soon. There's a person quite famous, like his assistant for Zelensky. His name is Arestovich, and he speaks with very calm voice, and people love to listen to him. So he said yesterday that 2-3 weeks until the war is over. But other experts say it's going to be months. But everybody says it will be over in 2022 for sure. So
I'd like to. I'm not necessarily going to disagree, but I think we need to have a little bit more caution. I mean, if it's, again, soldier for soldier, the Ukrainians are beating the Russians. The Russians are not fighting competently. They're, for all the reasons that Michael talked about with the discipline and morale in the Russian army. But the Ukraine, I mean, one of the things is, as long as the United States and NATO are continuing this pipeline of equipment into Ukraine, that's a very important thing, because frankly, Russia just has more everything. They have more men, they have more equipment, they have more fuel, they have more weapons, aircraft, missiles, everything, right? Just from attrition, the Russians could do more. What's become clear is that they cannot, the original plan was to take over the entire country. That's not going to happen. It looks like they're redeploying to take on to the east. The irony would be what the Russians may end up calling a victory is basically what we could call the status quo ante, the situation before the war, what they held in 2014, Crimea and the Donbass area, which is, and if that's all they end up getting after all of this, it's going to be, what was this all for? But I wouldn't say that the Ukrainians are going to completely defeat the Russians. As I used to, when I used to teach classes on and I still do on related to conflict, all wars generally end in one of two ways: either a military victory or a negotiated settlement. And a military victory means that one side is completely defeated and can no longer keep fighting. I don't see this ending in a military victory. The Russians are not going to be defeated in that sense. And it's going to be really hard to imagine the Ukrainians being defeated, because even if the military is taken out, you see the civilians, there's going to be an insurgency that could go on for years. And that's what was predicted originally. It's more likely to have some type of a negotiated settlement. But then what does that look like? And what's interesting, what I find fascinating is, despite everything that's happening, even today, as yesterday, as Zelensky was going through Bucha, and basically now for the first time is saying this is genocide. We're seeing genocide here. At the same time, he's saying he's still willing to negotiate with the Russians, because he wants to save Ukrainians. He doesn't want more Ukrainians to die. But what is a negotiated settlement going to look like? I mean, negotiation means that both sides need to give something up. Maybe will Ukraine say, yes, you can, we will recognize that Russia keeps Crimea. You can keep the Donbass, those far eastern areas. He's signaled, Zelensky has signaled, that maybe Ukraine would be neutral. Ukraine will no longer try and apply for NATO membership. Maybe not even the European Union. I don't know if that's going to happen. What is Russia willing to give up? I don't know. I mean, so this could go on for a long time. And the other thing is, Putin cannot lose. I mean, he cannot afford to lose, is what I'm saying. Unless he is overthrown by his generals, which is not very likely. I just don't see him basically saying, yeah, I'm going to allow myself to be defeated by these Ukrainians who I think are subhuman, and I'm going to pull all my troops out of Ukraine. I just don't see that happening. So I'm not optimistic about how it's going to end or how quickly it's going to end. but the Russians are not going to be able to achieve what they wanted to because they're just not competent enough. And one of the things that's really striking, and I need to go back to something that Michael said a couple minutes ago, if there was a war between NATO and Russia, unless Russia basically resorted to thermonuclear weapons, had a genuine World War III with exchange of ICBMs, what we've discovered is just the Russian military is a paper tiger, or maybe a paper bear would be more appropriate. It's striking how unable they are, how incompetent they are in terms of their fighting. I mean, if the Ukrainians can defeat the Russians on the battlefield, what would NATO do? NATO could wipe them up in a matter of days. But the Russians always have their nuclear arsenal to fall back on, and they have the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. And we don't know what's going on in Putin's head because clearly what he's doing for the last few weeks has not been rational.
Okay, I want to be mindful of our time here, so I'm going to ask one more question. What can we do to help the Ukrainians and/or deter Putin?
I'm going to leave that to Michael and also you, Amber, for the helping the Ukrainian people. I think you both have some resources to share.
There are a lot of funds, and I'm sure Amber has, and you can send them links and everything. Very many. But I play volleyball also myself, and in a group. And a couple of days ago, a couple of weeks ago, one of the guys told me, "How can I help?" And I also told him that there are this website, this place, this QR code, whatever. And he said, "No, I want to help you like somebody that you know personally." And I didn't know how to answer. And a couple of days later, they say, "Oh, now PayPal can do transaction between United States and Ukraine like cheap." That's so, and it happened actually. He sent me a check, and I sent it to one of my friends. So if you know if you have any friends that you know from Ukraine that could send it to somebody that they know, that's one of the choices. Also, we have among our guests, there's the choir conductor Sandra Harms over here. She's smiling. Yeah, I know if you can. She is preparing virtual choir. Prayer for Ukraine, молитва for Ukraine. So hopefully it's going to be successful, and it's kind of moral support, right? So thank you for doing that. I hope I'll be able to participate. Yeah, so that's kind of, yeah, there she is. Yeah, okay. So just not monetary way, but it's very important as well. And Amber, do you have any recommendations on your side?
Yeah, the Jewish Federation of Greater Indianapolis has been hosting a fundraiser, and the Glick family and Herbert Simon Family Foundation have offered to match new donations up to $50,000, although I believe we've already gone over that as far as what the Federation has raised. But as you can see in the chat, Jackie Goldstein from Beth-El just put the link in the chat. So donations can be made there. It goes directly to Jewish organizations that are currently on the ground in Ukraine. So you can feel confident that which sometimes does not always happen. And it's also meeting needs of women and girls in Ukraine, providing transportation and accommodations, Wi-Fi hotspots, all of these things to really sort of provide necessities to those fleeing Ukraine. You can also, I would also suggest something along the lines of the Red Cross or International Rescue Committee. All of those organizations are also on the ground. Physicians for Human Rights, they're on the ground, they're providing necessary treatment, necessary supplies for Ukrainians. So as I said, I want to be aware of time. So I'm going to say thank you to Michael and to Dr. Atlas and to Beth-El for setting this all up, and for everyone who joined us tonight. Thank you. If you have any additional questions that come up, please do not hesitate to contact. I'll just throw my email in the chat, and you can feel free to contact me, and I can always pass on any information to Dr. Atlas or Michael, unless they would like to go ahead and throw their emails in the chat as well.
I just did.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And I think our next event is our Brenda Bar event next week, Tuesday. We hope to see everyone at Beth-El Zedek in person. We are looking forward to seeing everyone in person at more events. And we are so grateful to Amber, Michael, and Pierre for their time this evening. This was a very important conversation to tackle, and we're grateful for their time tonight. So thanks to everyone tuning in. This is recorded, and we will put it up on our YouTube channel this evening. So
very good.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good to see you again, Michael. Too bad it's under these circumstances.
Yeah, next time.
Yes. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.